received a phone call in, I think, October of 2009 from Martin Babbickan. Martin passed away some time ago, but he was a University of Newcastle consultant meteorologist and a conjoint lecturer, and he did a lot of public engagements. So whenever anyone needed any information about what was going on with the climate, they'd call on Martin. He did a lot of media work, and he was speaking to various communities, and he rang me up saying that he'd been approached by this family who had all these original records, and they wanted to donate them to the university. I thought at that time that this family was local, and when I found out that he'd been actually talking to them in the New England district, I asked that, I contact an archivist colleague in Armidale who's working at the University of New England, and in Armidale, and that the physical records would go there. So he was quite excited about that. We made contact with the family. This was Richard Belfield and his wife Elspeth, and they were so proud of the work of Richard's grandfather. So Richard's grandfather was Algernon Henry Belfield, and he was like your archetypal climate nerd. This guy kept meticulous climate records every day from about 1877 all the way to 1922. He even took climate records on the day he died. That's how fanatical he was, how much he loved and was dedicated to climate records. So what does all this mean? These pastoral records had come off a property. They were now in the Archive of New England. We had an arrangement whereby they would digitise the records. They would look after the physical records because we all believed in keeping records as close to the communities that they were creating. So I didn't want to take custody of records that were from Armidale. I'd rather them stay in Armidale. But we would look after the digital image of those records and share them with the climate scientists who are currently here. So the University of Newcastle had its own environmental department with climate scientists that could work on it. So we thought we'd do all that sort of scientific work here, and Bill and the crew up at New England could house the original records. So that's how we became involved. And since that time, a whole host of people have come in to work with us on them. So
fantastic. It's interesting to hear that you just started the project sometime before we experiencing La Nina at this time, and there was a time that there were lots of climate denialism going on in 2009 and afterward. So in that environment, who did you collaborate with? People you addressed a little, but if you could go to.
Well, look, we were aware of the battles that were going on. I mean, you've got a lot of media wars going on with active climate science denial going on for whatever vested interests it was. I mean, we were dealing with this community. These people didn't all see eye to eye. These was pastoral people. Their local member was Barnaby Joyce, so they were very conservative in their outlook, and they really believed that this information would somehow debunk and support all the critics who were saying that all this science stuff was just bunkum, and that we'd always had hot weathers and we'd always had cold winters and all this sort of stuff. What's the big deal? I think it became a bit of a shock to them once the scientists became involved with this project to see that that wasn't the case. I mean, these records were really important because they showed what it was like pre-industrial. So they had some data that could help understand what was going on as we industrialised in the country. So the process that we adopted, because I remember we were still in the middle of some climate scientists getting threats, we made everything public, and we've always made everything public. The minute those records were digitised, we had a ceremony here. There was an official handover. They came down and they handed the CD-ROM with all the material. Remember what a CD-ROM was? Handed all the material over. We put it up on our blog sites, on our digital platforms, and made it all available to everyone. We put it in Research Data Australia. The library was involved in making sure that those records were put up where scientists could find them. And then nothing happened. No scientists came near them. We couldn't understand. We put up digital pictures of properties. If we put the snowball glass and eggs, we get thousands of hits and everyone wants to see them. But we put up all these climate records and no interest. And we couldn't really understand why. But the whole time we were having this young scientist called Dr. Lyndon Ashcroft, who was studying in Spain. She was studying at a university on climate science at a university. She kept a watchful eye over everything we were doing. And she was a young scientist, one of the bright new sparks. She'd won the 2014 Eureka Award, so she was part of the new generation of scientists. And she'd been watching us from afar. And she and another colleague mentioned to us that even though you think you've digitised these records and made them accessible, they're not really digitised to a scientist. This is not digitisation. Scientists need things scientifically digitised. And I said, well, what is that? And scientific digitising is actually extracting the data out of the photograph of the book and putting it into some kind of external spreadsheet or document that a scientist can then work with. So, then we learned something. So years of dealing with humanists who were quite happy to just deal with an image of something and they could see everything in the image. We learned something new about dealing with scientists in this open access network. So then a campaign began to actually recruit volunteers to actually extract the data. Now, this wasn't an easy task. These were records, thousands of measurements, thousands and thousands of readings that have been taken every day from 1877 to 1922, covering every aspect of weather observation in the New England district. So we didn't want any kind of volunteer, we wanted super volunteers, And we put out a poster, which we designed based on the war posters from the, 1910s for the First World War, we want you.
We want you.
We want you as a new recruit. And but we called it Algernon Wants You. And we recruited 27 volunteers from across Australia and even a couple from China to begin the process of scientifically digitising these records. Using what we had here at the time, I think we were using our own cloud, and we were downloading spreadsheets to them with pages of material for them to digitise. All that ended up going up online, and then it was up to the scientists themselves to upgrade those measurements to modern standards. So the upshot is that we shared the story of what was going on, all the highs and lows. The whole process was being documented through our communications with the outside world, So it wasn't just something here that was locked up in an academic thing. The open access process to us was keeping all the information outside, letting people know our struggles, our frustrations, so they were involved in the story. So anyone that was trying to deny that we were up to no good could see, go back to the originals, go and check every number. I would want them to. Go and check every number and make sure it correlates with what the scientists have transcribed. That's the whole idea of open access, being transparent about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Because I wanted people to feel confident that what these people were coming up with was important to know. So this process went from 2009. Governments were almost rendered unable to act because everyone created that seed of doubt that, but what if there's nothing wrong with coal after all? We've done all this mess, we've gone to renewables when we should have just stuck. Well, this has helped prove that there is something. I mean, if that doesn't work, then the constant climate destruction that's going on now has really sent the message through. And so we've been really proud of this project, not just for it, but when it came to its completion, it was accepted into the International Acre So it was like, this is where all the records go that are the most trusted records that all climate scientists around the world basically use for their data simulations. Australia had 3 data points before this project, and the Belfield records became the 4th. So since that time, other records from pastoral stations have come. The latest one has been the Wollong records. We had half of those records here, the other half were at Cessnock Library, and the team's been working on those as well, and all that information, we're still trying to get that up online. As the inquiries come and go, I'll get to that, but the same process is being used for that. The important thing about those records is that they were recorded by a woman, and we only learned recently that the Bureau of Meteorology believes that women in record observation date back to the 1960s. So Marion Wyndham, who took these records, really dates back to the 1870s along with Algernon.
Wow.
So that's really going to push history right back, that a woman recorded weather observations for 37 years. So that's pretty significant in terms of women's histories, in terms of climate recording. And the earliest record that we've got from the Hunter Valley dates back to 1843. So you hear a lot of people talking about, oh, since records began, and you think, well, when did records begin?
Mm-hmm.
And for most of them, it's somewhere around the 1890s or the 1900s or something like that. Well, no, they begin a lot earlier. So having this information out there helps people to see the value of this material, helps people to look in their own cupboards and see where other records might be had. The reason being that the more data you have, the better you're able to understand what's going on with the climate. And as I said before, it's not something of making friendships, but just people that believe exactly what you believe in. You know, the people we dealt with were conservative people, and we loved them dearly because they always believed that their ancestor kept these records for a reason. They wanted these records out in the public domain. They wanted people using these records. They wanted scientists to be able to use these records, either to prove that the whole thing was bunkum or to prove that we've got a problem that we need fixing. And I think they eventually came around to the conclusion that yes, there is a problem that needs fixing, and their information was crucial.
Fantastic. If I'm not wrong, like the data that you had was one of the most comprehensive. Yeah. And that makes it a visionary, internationally collaborated project, which is very significant. You addressed already some of my questions. Like you mentioned about the outcomes, but was there any output in forms of blog posts or journal publications, anything like that?
Yeah. Look, everything was documented as it occurred on the Cultural Collections, now Special Collections blog post. That was our WordPress site. Then when we moved over, I created, once the project came to a conclusion and all the data was out there and we had the data sets out there, papers had been published in international journals, Geoscience Journal, I think, which is an international journal. We also had a history paper published about the way that the records were created. So we had a historian on board, Dr. Ken Thornton, who's a postgraduate here. He did his thesis on history of power stations. Again, it was a good mix of scientist and humanist we wanted. Because the beauty of working also with Professor Howard Bridgman was that scientists don't care too much for the romanticised stories that historians love to have sometimes. They just want the data, they don't care. But they've come to learn that human beings are not robots, that you do need to understand how a person collected their records, you know. You have to know where they were living, what was the condition of their life. Once they started getting into the nitty-gritty, you know, you imagine yourself every day taking records at 9 o'clock. You know, what happens when you get a cold or you're not well? I mean, a human being is a human being. And we started to see those nuances in the record, you know, when he was ill or when he just couldn't, when he wasn't on top of these things. Where did they keep the screen that they, you know, had all the various barometers and things in? I'm not a scientist, so, you know, apologies if I've messed anything up, but they wanted to know those sorts of things. We wanted to track down photographs. We kept going back to the family, asking what happened to these, and then you start to see the problems even within families, you know, where records are destroyed by one part of the family, despite another part of the family wanting them to be kept. Richard and Elspeth did the best they could to safeguard as much as they could, and everything that they could find, they made sure went into a public institution. Everywhere we went, if we had to go and speak to people in New England or had to go and do a presentation, we went and did a presentation in the New England to the other pastoralists who were there, because they all asked the same questions. They were worried about what was going on. They're hearing one particular narrative coming from their politicians and another narrative coming from the scientists. And the only way you can fix that disconnect is to go and speak to people, go into the territory with them and explain the way this work is done. And the way you build confidence is by keeping everything as open as possible.
Yeah, and by the way, it opens, like it would remain open for any scientist in future to use and like have their own interpretations of that. So
Yeah.
it has a like continuous effect, I think. And one last question. What does it mean, the outcome of this project and the whole journey that you had, in your opinion, what does it mean for the university and the community in general?
Well, I think we're a regional university, and in terms of collaborating with other universities towards a particular aim about an issue that's very important, sometimes you just have to jump into these projects and just do them. Whether you have the resources or not, you just have to make the priority to do them. We were able to do that at that time with what we had. We've always been able to make those connections, and people will come to you. People will come to support you, whether they're volunteers or whether they're families with the institutions. For me, it's been a real proud undertaking, given what we've got now. We're every day now. I mean, I remember when recording weather was a joke. You know, The Most Boring Man, which was one of the Monty Pythons did a series in the 1970s, I think, called Ripping Yarns, and one was on this guy, the most boring man that loved shovels and recording weather observations. I have to, it was Michael Palin's show, Ripping Yarns. I remember now how ironic that is now, given the fact that we're always waiting on bated breath about what's happening with the weather, because people's lives are being affected directly. I mean, if you're in a house that's copped 4 flooding events in the last 18 months, you will know what we're talking about now. The fact that we've had to do it like this just goes to show you the level of poisoning that's gone on in the general community with regards to science and data. You know, everyone's got a role to play in collecting data, but we shouldn't put our personal opinion or what we think before the evidence, okay? It's like any historian that walks in here, I always advise, look, don't make up your mind and then come troweling through the archive trying to back up what you think. You let the evidence tell the story, and you are the translator of that story. And you have to do it honestly, whether you believe it or not, okay? You have to let the evidence tell that story. And humans are fallible, you know, we make mistakes, and this to me has been, I mean, look, just having something that we've created, a data set that now, you know, Australia had 3 points on that global network, 3 data points of trusted data which climate scientists use. This project created the 4th. So that to me is, it might just be a small thing, but it's an incredible job that these guys have done. And who are we talking about? We're talking about 4 people, basically, maybe 5, 27 volunteers, It's only a small group of people that have been able to achieve these things over a great period of time, from 2009 to about 2019. You know, 10 years a project for this alone. Now they're working on the Wolong, and they've always got their eyes out for the next data set. So when we're finally finished this one, another one will emerge, because that's how it seems to work. But it's been for me a very, very rewarding experience, and also one where we're able to connect scientists to historical information, because there's so much that we can learn from history that really helps us understand what's going on right now.
Yeah, I think to summarize what you mentioned, it was a visionary open access project which at the national level was significant because it added, as you mentioned, another comprehensive point of data about the climate in this time that we are very physically experiencing climate change. At the local level, it was very important because it's about the region. So more than anywhere else, like it tells a story about this region, which had fair experience of pollution as well in its past. So it's a multidisciplinary project because it had historians, scientists, archivists, all of that, and all together I think it presents a good example of how open access can
And
function.
Dr. Ashcroft is also connected to Canberra scientists that are doing this on a national level. So they're trying to really create impact in terms of gathering weather records similar to this around the country as a historic weather hub. So we've just made sure that we've done our backyard as best as possible, because that's our field of activity, you know. And if you can connect up with people from other regions that can do the same. So collaboratively wise, this is important, because this is, historic records aren't just in the past somewhere. I mean, what we did in the past affects what is happening to us now.
Yes.